Welcome to Dwell on These Things, a podcast of Dwell Community Church in Columbus, Ohio, where we take some time to discuss good things worth dwelling on, as Paul suggested to the Philippians in chapter 4. I'm your host, Paul Alexander. All right. So this week we're joined by Elder Josh and Elder John. Guys, thanks for biking all your way up to the studio in your white short sleeve shirts and ties.
We always travel in pairs on bikes. Yep, that's exactly right.
Totally. You guys seem ready to go.
Nailed it.
Good to be here, man.
Mm-hmm. John Ross and Josh Benadum here are elders here at Dwell Community Church and are up for re-election this spring. John, why should people vote for you instead of Josh?
I'm actually running on the same ticket.
Are you?
Yeah, we're trying to do that.
Same team?
Yeah.
Package deal.
No, actually, how does this process work?
We have a period of 2 to 3 years, I believe, where we put ourselves up for re-election, and it's for transparency's sake, because we want to make sure that people have a chance to weigh in on who's governing the church. And there's processes too to put us up as candidates for re-election. Making sure that the elders approve, and so it's a vetting process. You want to make sure that the people who are leading the church still have the backing of God, and that's kind of borne out in life and ministry and character and family and all those things. So it's not just like a tenured position where once you're in, you can't get out. And that seems to be how the Lord sets it up. So I think we're doing a good job in terms of how that works.
Yeah. And we each had to do a review process with Ryan and Conrad. And other elders are welcome to chip in insight, constructive criticisms, or concerns. And so,
Specifically about your role as elder or your walk? Or?
Yeah, we actually do 2 different reviews because John and I are also both sphere leaders. So we both work as pastors in the church, overseeing house churches and teaching classes and things like that. There's one review process for our role as sphere leaders, and there's another review process for our role as elders.
Okay.
So
cool. And so the vote will come to the servant team.
Correct.
Our group of about 1,000 lay leaders in the church. Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool. Seeing how many in our church don't know either of you personally. You've had an impact on many, but I'm sure on that team, there's many you guys haven't got to talk to much.
Sure.
We thought that rather than relying on a blurb in an email or something like that, we could spend some time getting to know you guys a little bit. John, my understanding is you didn't come to Christ until you were an adult already, post-college.
Correct.
In your career. How did God call you?
Yeah, to go all the way back, I grew up in a fantastic home. I was raised Catholic, and we were pretty involved in Catholic church growing up. My parents had various leadership roles in the Catholic church. So I knew a lot about Christ, but, I didn't know Christ personally until I came to Dwell Home Church. I studied journalism at Ohio State. When I graduated, I worked for the Dispatch for a little bit, and then my internship was up, and I was trying really diligently to get a job, a newspaper job, magazine job, anywhere. I applied as far north as Fairbanks, Alaska, as far south as Key West. I got 2 interviews. One was in Marathon, Florida, and that was tempting on some levels, but I felt like I should take the one at Columbus Alive, which was the weekly paper here. And I eventually just felt like I should just take the one in Columbus. That's a better job. And eventually it had me sitting next to a dude named Chris DeVille, who maybe some listeners know. He's a great leader in the adult ministry. And DeVille befriended me, became my best friend. I mean, we sat next to each other. As I was going through some really difficult personal problems, feeling isolated, going through some anxiety and even low-grade depression, and getting further and further and further into substance abuse, drugs and alcohol abuse. And basically just a lot of elements of my life were kind of unraveling, and he was there for me. I mean, in every respect. I mean, I literally, we can get a little bit raw on this podcast, but I'd be sitting in my bed hungover, basically unable to get out of my bed, and he would show up with a couple of gallons of his mom's homemade soup. I mean, literally nursing me back to health, right? And we'd sit there and watch The Office all afternoon. And
What a friend.
Yeah, I mean,
that's great.
Chris is a great guy.
Yeah, and he tried to get me to come out. I was very resistant. One day we were riding up the Olentangy Trail just outside of the towers at OSU, and he got off his bike and he walked back. He hugged me. He told me he loved me. He's like, I'm really begging you to investigate Christ, to come out and check out a meeting with me. And I did, and on and off for a while, and I eventually received Christ and decided to walk in this church. So, yeah.
That's good.
I was in that group.
No way.
Yeah, Benadum was there. I can remember, meeting up with Benadum and some of the guys, and that was part of what drew me. Was the guys were relatable and cool and interesting, and they were doing cool stuff throughout the city, which I thought was really neat.
Dude. Well, Josh, beat that. You grew up in Cambodia, right? Overseas?
I did. Yeah. Well, grew up is a strong term. I was there for pretty much high school.
Okay.
So I like to say that I spent very significant years of my life overseas.
In a Christian home, your parents were part of Dwell before?
Jeff Gordon actually led my dad to Christ. They were in medical school together. My family moved around. They were in Virginia. We were in West Virginia. And then we came back to Columbus in the 90s. And then at that time, my parents got back involved in what was then Xenos. So we didn't actually go to the mission field until 2001.
That's cool. I'm guessing there was a point when you decided to make your faith your own.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people know when they made their decision to start a relationship with God. I actually can say that I'm not 100% confident of when I did that, which I tell that to people sometimes, and they're like, "Are you sure you did it?"
I know we could do it right now.
Yeah, we
Joe.
could. We could pray right now. We really could. But I mean, I'm confident, obviously, that I have the Holy Spirit. When I look back at my life, there were kind of a few key moments where I'm like, I think that I made the choice at one of those times. And so, and honestly, the two main ones really revolve around Cambodia, because when my family first said that we were going to move to Cambodia, that was a crisis for me. I mean, I was 10 when I found out that we were going to do it, and I had established friendships, and I was so against the idea. And so really through some somewhat supernatural circumstances, I became convinced that God really did want my family to move to Cambodia. And so I know that at minimum, I had a personal belief in God around the time that I was 11 or 12 years old as we were getting ready to go to Cambodia.
Like God showed you.
He did, yeah. No, there was pretty wild personal experience that led to me becoming convinced that was actually something that God wanted us to do. And so that was really good for me, because I think what a lot of missionary kids struggle with is this sense of they lack agency. They feel like they were just dragged from one place to another by their parents. And I never felt that way. I always felt that I chose to go to Cambodia. Like it was not something that was forced on me. And so that enabled me to really embrace the experience, I think, in some ways, where maybe a lot of other kids might have been resentful of their parents. But once I was in Cambodia, I really didn't walk with God in Cambodia. And I actually think that for a lot of high school, I would have even resisted labeling myself as a Christian. I believed in God in a general sense. I was never an atheist. But Cambodia was a really beautiful, amazing place. I had some of the best and most formative experiences of my life there. But it was also a very dark place. I saw some of the most traumatic things that I've seen also while living in Cambodia. And so that really put a lot of questions in my head about intellectual, rational questions, moral questions about whether or not God exists. Can I trust God with my life? I really spent the majority of high school kind of struggling with those questions and exploring other ways of conceiving of God, or just trying to find meaning in other areas of life. And so it wasn't really until I was 17 when I really decided that I believed in Jesus and I wanted to live my life for him.
It was probably only a small Christian community there.
Yeah, I had nothing. I had my parents, but as we all know, in high school, I don't know, having your parents only means so much sometimes, and so I was not super inclined to listen to them during that phase of my life.
And so you returned to Columbus to be part of this church, is that right?
So my plan for my life was to maybe go to Europe or to go to school in Singapore or something, and I really did not want to come back here to go to Ohio State. I felt like there was nothing for me in Columbus. I didn't really have a lot of friendships that I'd maintained. I had a couple friendships where I'd like been able to kind of talk a little bit, but not much. And so it was actually because I had an opportunity the summer before my senior year of high school to go do tsunami relief work in India.
And after that tsunami.
Yeah, because that would have been, that happened in 2004. And so 2005 would have been the summer before my senior year. And I went and I spent some time with the India Gospel League doing tsunami relief work. And I was there for a little while, but one of the weeks that I was there, I met up with a short-term team of high school students who'd come to India to also do relief work with Tom Dixon. And so Tom Dixon was there, and a bunch of other people who are still here in this fellowship that were my age were there. And so that was really my first time.
Was that coincidental, or?
It wasn't quite coincidental. It was like I was looking for something to do. My parents told me that I could go participate in something, if it revolved around relief and development work. I think that we found this opportunity, and it just so happened that there was also going to be this group there that I could meet up with. And so one of the guys that I met up with while I was on that trip was Josh Frank. I can still remember this so clearly that I just never been around someone my own age with such authentic and zealous faith, like someone who was so loving and so convinced and so eager to give out like what God was giving him. And it was contagious to me. And so in my time in India, like Josh Frank, Tom Dixon, and then the Indian Christians that I was interacting with just had this love and this authenticity, which I did not have. And so it was really at the end of that experience, after much personal struggling with God, that I decided, I was like, if I'm really going to walk with God, I got to be somewhere where I can be around a guy like Josh. That was the conclusion that I drew. And so
Everybody should be around Josh Frank for a little bit.
yeah. It's a necessary ingredient of everyone's spiritual life.
haven't.
I'm convinced.
That's probably my problem.
It is. At least we know now. At least you know.
Yeah, identifying the problem is half the battle, dude.
Yeah. So
We'll get him on here.
I literally moved to Columbus more or less because I was like, I got to get around like guys like Josh Frank if I'm going to walk with God. So
When you guys have both mentioned a couple key dudes here, Chris DeVille, John, who else early on was influential?
Yeah, a lot of guys. Benadum, obviously. We were in this first home church, and same thing with Brett McCallum. Those two guys have been instrumental, really, at kind of every stage of the game for me because, literally, they were in the first home church that I went to. They were, trying to befriend me from the early days, and then, at various points, we've been in groups together. We've split apart, and then we've come back together. And they've given me really important encouragements. Like during the years when I got engaged to my wife, Caitlin, I went back into group with Benadum, and I feel like that was a short time, but it was like really influential for me because he was already leading. I was, just a brand new college home church leader, and being able to learn from somebody like that is really important. Yeah. And then, Brett was, as I was leading a high school group, he was very encouraging and offered a lot of just information and resources to me. And now it's really awesome that I kind of caught up to them a little bit, and then now we get to lead a sphere together, which is awesome. That is
like some of your best friends.
Yeah, that is it. Really is. Like we share an office together. It's like it's productive and it's super fun, and I just feel like it's a huge blessing. So those guys, have been like super super influential for me in my character development and helping marriage issues and just having people to listen and obviously just to do life with too. They're like Josh and I he got me back into skateboarding this year, which is super fun. We've been ripping down at the OSU the new skate park down there and over at the warehouse lot and
at
everything.
40.
Yeah. I took about 18 years off, but I've gotten a decent amount back, and it's been super fun. Sweet. And just to going out, and it's a great way for somebody who's 40 years old and works at a church to go meet people. And then Den too. I know you've had the old man on the podcast before, but probably thousands of people in our church could say that Den's influenced them. And it's funny, he and I have been team teaching LTC for I think 8 years now. 7 or 8 years. Obviously he met weekly with me even after I was raised up as a leader and I started working at the sphere level for him. Josh and I were meeting with him weekly for a long time. But
this is valuable.
It's hundreds of hours of investment in various capacities. And I still get to learn from him every week during class when we teach, Even the, just passively and taking stuff about his experiences, success, failure, has been really instrumental for me. And, he opens up his home still every Wednesday. And we'll hang out there and sit by the fire and just talk shop, and he's been great. So yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah,
probably had no idea walking with God together early on what God's plans were long term, like to stay together.
Yeah, no way. That's really the story of walking with God, isn't it? You look back and you're just like, I can't believe what God's done. I can't believe He's taken us this far, what He's done along the way. It's beyond anything I would have expected or hoped.
Praise God.
Yeah.
You guys are busy, I know, and you guys also have young families, some young kids. I We had Kate in here a couple months ago. She was just talking about the work-life balance. I was wondering what that looks like for you guys. Just so much going on as sphere leaders and elders and home church leaders and disciples, all these things, and raising these great kids. How's that working out?
Well, we actually both have girls the exact same age.
Oh, cool.
So
All girls?
Yeah.
Yep.
He's got two
Me too.
girls. I've got two girls.
Yep.
Yeah.
3 girl dads.
That's right.
We can compare notes. You can teach us some things, Paul. You're further down the road than us.
It's wonderful being girl dad.
Yeah.
Love it.
We love it. Yeah, I think, the transition from one kid to 2 kids was definitely a big change. And I'd be lying if I said that I feel like we've totally figured that out. I think one thing that I've learned is to be somewhat content with the chaos. Just knowing that, like, some weeks are tough and there's not really some sort of perfect schema, through which to make sure that, we're not stressed, that everything balances at any given time.
Right.
And so I think being content with that and trusting God in that, and just be communicating with my wife and trying to consistently reevaluate and communicate about how we're spending our time has been just a good ongoing discipline.
Sure.
Mike McCormick, when I was first having kids, he pulled me aside and he was like, "You got to get weekly time with your daughters." He's like, "You got to, and you got to get it soon." And he drilled that into my head, and I heard that same thing from a lot of older men. And so I do have a weekly date with each of my daughters and try to just defend that at all costs. I feel like really making sure those quality times happen has been kind of one of the orienting points of my week.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a book, I think it's The 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Families. And in the intro, the author makes an interesting point. He's like, look, all families are basically off track on what they're supposed to do. There is that chaos that's just kind of endemic to especially with,
Things always come up.
Right. Stuff comes up, life happens, especially in the toddler and young child phase. I'm sure it happens at every phase, but that's the one that we're kind of in together. And he's like, every family's off track most of the time. The effective family is like, they have an idea, they have a very clear vision of where they want to go. And I thought that was pretty interesting because you're right. You just have to embrace the chaos. If you crumble, everything's something, every time something doesn't go exactly the way that you want it, like you're going to be crumbling a lot of the time. But I think like having a vision of like setting the tone for we want to have a spiritually minded, engaged, loving, fun home with a lot of laughter and a lot of closeness is cool. Like you try to plumb the line there. I think, like Josh said, having the weekly times kind of carved out and have those times be pretty sacred. You said fight for them at all costs. That's kind of what we do. So we have a couple of family nights. We instituted family breakfast, which is actually like pretty effective.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, our kids are getting up way too early. I'm up. It's not like I'm going back to sleep. I might as well use this time productively. So we've actually been sitting down for breakfast multiple times a week. And then I do get a date with each of my girls. So Waverly's 3 and Lucy is 5. So these dates are super fun.
same. Iris is a little bit behind Waverly, so she's like 2.5, but
Same age. That's
same
great,
age.
dude.
Yep.
And Thea's 5.5?
Thea's 5, yeah. Thea's like maybe 2 months older than Lucy.
Right, okay.
So
Kindergartners or next year?
they will
Next
be.
year,
They will be.
yep.
Oh, it's a big deal.
So too, and then making sure that you're getting good time with the missus as well.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Misses.
Yeah, so Kate and I have every date night every Tuesday, and then we generally try to carve out at least one other time during the week to hang out, and that's good just to decompress and just to relax and kick it and have fun.
You guys still love each other?
What's that?
You guys still love each other?
Oh yeah. It's really helped that. And she's putting up with me, and yeah. I mean, I think we both probably would agree that we couldn't do these jobs at all, let alone halfway effectively if we didn't have our
without each
amazing
other.
wives.
Yeah.
Because it's just their
Definitely.
sounding boards and their support and encouragement, and they laugh with us and call us out when we're being over the line or something like that, and just serve us in a lot of other ways,
Right.
which is pretty sweet.
And they're also sophisticated leaders in their own right. Their wisdom and insight into home churches, into people, into God. We're one unit, to be sure. So thankful for that.
And I guess you could say my wife raised me up because I married into leadership. So
You're a discipler.
yeah, right.
It's cool. It sounds like full and good lives God's given you. I was thinking we could take this up a notch, a little more NFL Combine style, testing your prowess as elders here. Let's put it to the test. Josh, it says in the LTC exam, there's a question, explain the case for vernal, plenary, and... Just kidding. Get to see if
We
you
just
guys
taught that. I might be able to do it. Yeah. I've got that fresh. I could probably do it.
detail your answer with appropriate scripture. That's what it says. Didn't want to talk about your role as elders. You're just playing a key role in deciding the direction of our church. Where do you hope that our church is when your kids enter college?
In a lot of ways, I hope it stays the same. I do think that there's a lot of stuff that we're doing, in Columbus and improvements we're making here, and then obviously across the world as we continue to work, through various new global partners. But, when I think about the opportunities that my girls will have to stay here and to be mentored by somebody who's going to be eagerly sacrificing multiple hours a week to help them, and the chance for them to live in a ministry house, I think that is so amazing. I lived alone for most of my college years because I basically just wanted to be by myself and do whatever I wanted and not answer to anybody and basically just party whenever I wanted and not have to worry about taking anybody off or whatever. So, when I look at oh my God, they could get a really great education. They could go in and, kind of start to find themselves. And they could do that in a close-knit Christian community where people live together, they do life together, and they're just saturated in New Testament style living. I think that is so sweet. And yeah, so I think a lot of the stuff needs to stay the same. I also think that, as we're doing this and we're trying to do a little bit better of a job of letting people know some of the improvements and innovations that we have done, I do feel like we are a church that's trying to do as good of a job as we can improving certain elements and basically not changing the core of who we are, but kind of basically doing an increasingly better job and working to kind of refine and perfect the core of what we're doing. So that's kind of how I see it.
And communicating about that.
Yeah, right.
Better.
I think too that as from our perspective as elders and then sphere leaders in the student ministry, a lot of our stuff is happening very quickly, and a lot of our stuff is always in flux as we try to improve it and tweak this and tweak that. And sometimes it's just people don't understand some of the changes that we have made for the better. So I think we should keep doing that. But again, I think we've done a good job as a church of basically understanding why we do what we do and teaching why we do what we do. When obviously I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I don't really understand why they did anything. I never understood, okay, why do they wear this? Why is the church like this? Why do we do Sunday morning? I never had any explanation for any of the things that we do. And I think our church has done a really good job in diving into the Word, investigating what God wants us to do, figuring out the mission, the vision, and some of the core parameters of what community is supposed to look like, and then citing our sources, right? So people understand that. So in terms of large-scale movements, I think we should actually keep doing this, and I think that's going to be a tall order as culture moves away from biblical knowledge and biblical acceptance and not really liking or even wanting to tolerate the biblical worldview. So doing what we're doing going forward is going to be probably more and more difficult, and that's why it's going to take some strength. It's going to take some grit to be able to carry it out for the generation that's coming up and the generation, if we're still here, for
Their kids, right?
for our kids, yeah, so they can have the same luxuries.
Probably that why is something that needs explained to every generation all the time.
Totally.
Why are we doing this?
Totally. Yeah, explained and maybe even put in the language of that generation too. I think one of my hopes for my kids is I want them to love Jesus and be all out for the kingdom of God, and I don't want them to be formalists. And I know that that's a risk for kids who grow up in Christian environments, is that they could become formalists, people that just kind of do things because that's how their families and their friends have always done them. And so one thing I really appreciate about our church is the emphasis on, getting out there and having a radical personal walk with God. So getting out there and actually serving God and building a personal ministry. Because I think the process of really doing that and engaging that process in faith kind of breaks up your formalism, right? It makes it hard. You can't just work in the system, run the system, and bear spiritual fruit. That takes abiding in Christ, right? And so I think one of my hopes for my kids is that our church never loses that it maintains its focus on what's really behind our structures, behind some of the institutions that we've built, and that they can maintain that sense that they're part of a dynamic movement of God, right? So I hope by the time my kids, are becoming adults, I hope and pray that they'll still have that ethos of discipleship, the things I think God has really worked into the core of, like John said, this is who we are. God made us this way, and He's called us to this. So I hope those things are still there. But I also think, Den, I remember hearing Den say in a teaching at one point, he said, if our church looks exactly the same in 50 years, you'll know that something went wrong. And the context of that teaching, I'm pretty sure, is teaching on wineskins, on wine and wineskins, and how every generation really does have to kind of go back and look at the New Testament, look at the book of Acts and say, what does it look like to live this out in our day, right? And so I want my kids to know how to do that and to have that value. So
Adapting.
yeah, totally. I think on a personal note, one other thing I really hope to see, I hope by the time my kids are adults, I hope that churches like ours will exist in other cities. I hope that we will see what the Joneses and company are doing down in Cincinnati, what what the Hales and the Gordons, et cetera, are doing in Pittsburgh. I think it'd be amazing, and I pray that we'll see more stuff like that happen down the road too.
Branching out to other communities.
Totally.
Cool. What you want for your daughters there sounds like what God gave you, eventually a real conviction about the why I'm doing this.
Yeah, for sure.
And for you, John, that's something, you didn't grow up with that. Well, you grew up with the formalism, like he was talking about.
Right.
The not knowing the why.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good way to put it.
This is good. I know for sure that you guys are under a lot of stress in your roles as elders. I was wondering, since stepping in, how do you guys feel like God has grown you guys into that role and as a follower of Christ in general?
It's hard to say. It's been such an uneventful 3 years. Just kidding. Not much has happened, to stretch us or to grow us.
Gotten better at Zoom.
There have not been very many difficult decisions to make. I mean, man, it's just been such a breeze these last few years. How am I supposed to answer that question, Paul?
One thing that God has kind of brought up to me and just challenged me on more recently is the security in resting in Him amid really difficult stuff. I was thinking about that. I think it's Psalm 3 where He's just like, I lay down and I wake up again because the Lord sustains me. He's like, I'm not going to fear even though 10,000s are assailing me on every side. And I'm just like, so He's watching, a battlefield of enemies just surrounding Him, and He's getting a good night's sleep. And that's just the kind of trust that, only comes from having a relationship with Christ, having a deep, abiding trust in Christ. And on some level, I always want to grow in that. That's not an arrival point. I don't think that's kind of a continuous journey inward and towards God. But I do feel like God has helped me with that.
Yeah.
He's also helped me grow in communication and kind of learning just more about working with different types of people. I've always been in this sphere. I've always been in the college group, even though I was so much older than everybody. But yeah, so being able to branch out, and I've had some really cool conversations, interactions with a lot of servant team members who have been here for, they've dedicated their lives to what God is doing in this church, and been able to learn from them and take feedback from them. I feel like God has grown me in that, and that's those are both areas where I feel very stretched. It's just challenging too. I mean, I was in some ways kind of resistant at first to just like I don't know how to lead people in various sectors of the church that I don't know personally. I felt
because
much
as elder,
more,
you have to have the view of the whole church.
Sure,
Yeah.
and I'm like they're fantastic people.
Yeah.
Where it's not just like my own thing is the best. It's just when leading a sphere is a lot different because I know a good deal of the people in our home churches personally,
Right.
And so it's a little bit different and kind of daunting when you go out and try to interact with people that don't know you don't know them, and I mean, obviously that's part of why we're doing this, so we can forge those bonds a little bit more closely, which I'm into. But God's just helped me to give. He's given me a lot of wisdom. He's given me the ability to teach. I've been able to teach different bigger meetings, so that is a point of connection for people, and I feel real stretched in doing some of those for the first time. So yeah, those are some thoughts.
I want to add in something about John and some of the ways that he's grown, but also I think things that he contributes to our church as an elder. John brings a certain skill set, I think, to our eldership that not everyone necessarily has. I mean, John is a meticulous person. He's a detail-oriented person. A lot of us are more kind of big picture type people, and John's a big picture thinker too, but he has that ability to really get down into the details and knows why they're meaningful. And I have very little patience for details a lot of the time. And so sometimes he'll kind of get zeroed in on something and I'm like, why are we talking about that? But then later it turns out that actually matters quite a bit. And so he's a detail-oriented person. He's careful. He's also just got this breadth of professional experience of time he spent, working in media and working with large-scale communications because he was an editor for Columbus Monthly. And so I think a lot of that professional experience also just really blesses the church when combined with the spiritual wisdom that God has given him. So
And God had a plan for all that when you were getting into it.
Yeah.
You couldn't see. That's cool.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do think that's part of the whole ways that God called me. He allowed me to get rack up some experience, and then he's been able to use that. That's really sweet.
Cool.
yeah.
How about you, Josh? Has it also been 3 years?
I think maybe it's been 2 years for you, 3 years for me.
Yeah,
I think
right,
that's what
right,
it's been.
right.
I think I've been
That's right.
one
You
year.
were the one that mentioned. Right?
Yeah, 1 year longer, I think. Yeah, it's been really good. God's been growing every part of me, and whether I was doing this role or not, I'm sure that those things would have been the same. But if I had to isolate a couple things that I think that God has been doing uniquely because of the role that I've been in, I think one thing is I've really had to come to grips with this uncomfortable part of me where I really don't like to be put in situations where I'm not going to be successful. And I don't think I really realized the degree to which I would kind of intentionally box myself out of situations if I thought that I wasn't going to win until I got into this role. When all of a sudden I feel like there's been so many things put in front of me where I've been like, there is no one else to push this off to. There's no one else to step in and be the one to handle this. It's like I've really got to wade into it with a conscious understanding of my own deficiencies and believing that God is going to work through my imperfect knowledge and capacities to make a difference. And so I think that's one big thing. And then I think another thing too is that he's taught me a lot about how to handle opposition. I remember that when I was put up for elder candidacy, we went through a rough patch in my home church where there was a little bit of a division that took place, and there were some people who were really angry, and they were really angry with me. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back at it, I think that was knowing how to kind of field that with humility, but then also in the wake of that, work through cynicism and potential bitterness. That whole process was really formative and important. I think having been in a role where all the problems in the church are kind of on the table at the same time and needing to be able to wade into those things without just personally reacting to some of these things which albeit imperfectly, I think that's been it's been cool seeing the way that I feel like God has humbled me, and he's also increased my bandwidth for dealing with situations like that.
I mean, what you're both describing is a stretch beyond what you were able to do, and
For sure.
but him using it to draw you to rely on him more.
Right on.
That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I personally would want it myself at the level you guys are facing, but I respect that.
I mean, it's also been a source of great joy too.
Sure.
It's true the last few years have been really difficult, but man, I mean, like we often talk about that really powerful experience we had at the elders retreat when God spoke to our elders in a supernatural way. Just the unique kinds of affirmation that God has brought, the encouragement of people in this church, the like-mindedness and the unity that we currently have on our eldership team. I mean, it's also been a source of great joy. I feel so blessed to be in this role. I don't feel like I deserve this role, but I feel blessed, and it's an honor. It's an honor to get to serve our church in this way.
Do you each plan to vote yes for the other?
I told you we're running together.
Yeah, that's right, together. It's a package.
Yep. I give you my word I will vote for you.
Thanks, dog.
It's good. Well, this has been really helpful, guys. Thanks for your time and your dedication to shepherd our church. Really appreciate it. If listeners had specific questions, about you guys in particular, is there a way for them to contact you?
Yeah, we've both got church email addresses. Just mine's benadumj@dwellcc.org. Yeah.
Yep. Mine's rossj@dwellcc.org. Feel free to shoot me anything you'd like.
Yeah. Or come talk to us at a big meeting or something, too. If you see us, we're always down to meet people.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. Well, thanks, too, for you listening in. If you enjoyed this discussion, Check out our other episodes and subscribe to receive a notice when future episodes drop. Until then, press on.